Hello and thanks for watching. This video is intended for flight simmers who'd like to have a go at using these little fellas. The VOR or VHF omnidirectional radio range beacons are all over the UK and many parts of the world. You can use it by setting your autopilot to use them, or you could just visually look at your gauges and fly manually. Navigating by these requires a little bit more thinking and a bit more planning than just putting in a GPS route, so I think it's quite fun to have a go at it from time to time. One of the good things about flight simulators is you can get to do stuff you wouldn't normally do in the real world, so you can set virtually zero visibility and then see if you can follow a course using just these fellas. So they show up on the chart as a hexagon with a dot in the middle, and if it's got distance measuring equipment as part of the signal, it has a square around it as well. So to show you what you can do with these radio beacons, I'm going to take off from the West Country and I'm going to head west towards South Wales, and we're going to use the Brecon VOR just here, frequency 11745. So in preparation, I'm going to tune nav1, so I'm using just the standard Cessna 172 with the 6-pack instruments, but it has got this GPS built in. I'm not going to use the GPS, but nav1 is controlled over here, so I'm going to set nav1 to the frequency. And you'll see that something has happened over here. This gauge is assigned to nav1. This one down here in this aircraft is assigned to nav2. And you can actually use two VORs at the same time if you use both of these gauges. Now up here we need to make sure we're not on GPS, because the needle will be trying to track a GPS route, but we haven't programmed that. So we'll put that on nav, and you see that the needle has just swung round. We'll look at that more closely in a minute. Let's get up in the air first of all. I'm just using the autopilot so that I can concentrate on fiddling with other stuff, but you don't have to. You could do this flying manually. So here we go, flying along here. So let's imagine the first scenario, that we just want to go straight to there in a straight line. So I can see that we're going to want a heading of about 299 magnetic. Okay, we've tuned in nav1 to the Brecon radio VOR, and we can see the code displayed there on our electronic display, so that's nice. This is telling us what radial we're on, don't worry about that for the moment. First of all, I'm going to turn this dial until the needle comes into the middle. So this is scenario 1. This is just the most basic use of the VOR. So the needle has come into the middle, and now we can see it's showing a compass heading of about 297. So let's turn our heading to that. With the needle pretty much in the middle, so we're between those two, so it wants to be a heading of between about 297 and 298. There we go, so we're now tracking along, going directly to Brecon. Okay, so how is this working? So the VOR is sending out radials of radio signals at 1 degree intervals, like spokes coming out of it, and our aircraft receiver can detect which radial is pointing towards it. And that's what we see here. We're seeing we're on radial 118 degrees. So that radial 118 degrees is going to be the reciprocal of what we've got here. So if you imagine taking a bearing from that to our aircraft now, and you can see it's 118 magnetic. My understanding is that VORs are always magnetic bearings, and that does mean that they need to be adjusted on a regular basis to account for changes in the magnetic declination. So if you are flying somewhere where it hasn't been adjusted, there may be an error in the real world, I gather. If it's a glass cockpit aircraft, we'll need to change this CDI source to VOR 1. So click on the soft key there. So VOR 1, so that's the equivalent of nav 1, and the frequency is adjusted here. So we want 11745. And take that across. It comes up with BCN, so we know we're tuned into the correct place. And here's our needle. So to turn that needle, we're going to change the course, which is the inner one over here. And as we rotate it round to face the beacon, the needle comes in. So you can see that the beacon is currently in that direction. Also on the glass cockpit you get another little feature, so you can set some arrows so that it always points towards the beacon. Bearing 1 is this, so that's showing a GPS track if we had one set. That's showing ADF. And now it's showing nav 1, so just keep clicking on bearing 1 to keep toggling through that. Okay, so this is nice and easy. We're just using the beacon to head straight towards it. And would we always want to do that? No, we wouldn't. But let's consider a situation over here in London. You'll notice that the VORs are strategically placed. You could do a route from Midhurst up to Ockham. That takes you neatly between those two bits of airspace. Then across to Biggin Hill and across to Detling, and then up what's that one? Lambourne, which takes you neatly through all of these airspaces, then up to Brooklands Park, across to Bovingdon, back out to Compton, and that gives you a nice circular route missing all of the airspaces. So the VORs are often arranged strategically to do that. Okay, so this is all well and good, but we don't want to go straight to Brecon. We'd like to do some sightseeing and fly up one of the valleys. Let's say this one, for example. That looks quite nice. So we could use our radio navigation to fly along and then pick up the correct radial that'll take us in that direction. So what radial do we want? Well, let's draw a line coming out from Brecon. So if we pick that one, that will allow us to find this edge of Newport, and then we can follow the valley from there. So we want to use the 137 radial. So now turn your dial until 137 is shown at the bottom. Can you figure out why it needs to be shown at the bottom? Yes, you can, because it's the reciprocal, isn't it? So our heading is going to be that way, but the radial that we want is the one that's coming this way. So there is a little bit of thinking to be done here. So what did I say we want? We want the 137 radial. So that's displayed at the bottom. Now this little arrow tells you whether you are flying towards the beacon or away from it. So in this situation we obviously want to be flying towards it. If I were to spin the gauge round, the gauge now thinks that we want to be heading more southerly, which will be away from the beacon. So with it set this way, this needle represents where the radial is relative to our aircraft. Can't quite fit it on. So the radial is over to our left and the needle is over to our left. So now we would look at our chart and think, right, okay, well let's now head due west until we join that radial, and then we can follow the radial along. So let's now just turn due west. We're now getting closer to that radial. And look what's happening to our needle. Our needle is now moving in from the left. As we get closer and closer to it, the needle will move to the center. When it's in the center, we are on that radial. So I'm now going to change to nav mode in my autopilot. Because now what the autopilot will do is it will wait until we hit that radial, and then it'll turn us to follow it. When the needle's just at the edge of those little lines. There we go, starting to turn. There we are, needles in the middle, so we're now following that line. Now don't worry if you've drawn on your chart or in little nav map, if your aircraft isn't exactly on the line, don't worry, because 1 degree is actually, you know, a small angle sort of between maybe there and there. That's where it thinks it is pretty much exactly, and that might not be exactly the same as what your simulator thinks. Now, how far away are we? Let's say we're lost. Okay, well, in this display here, we've got a DME measurement, so 12.6 nautical miles. So we can adjust our line, 12.6, and there we are. You can see we're at Newport now. Okay, so that is perhaps a slightly more interesting use of the beacon now. So let's say we want to plan a route. We're going to go from here up to the beacon, and then we want to go back. We want to go back to Garston Farm. Well, we could use that beacon to fly just in a straight line, but that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is to take in the sights of Chepstow, fly down along the bridge, and then come into Garston Farm from the north. So we don't have to go all the way to Brecon to do that. We could now decide to fly north and pick up this radial coming out. Let's do that. So we want the 107 radial coming back out. So the 107. You'll see that the little arrow there has now changed to from, because the system knows that we will be flying from the beacon on that heading. If I engage the autopilot now back onto nav mode, the aircraft will turn onto like an intercepting course. And our needle starts to move in. So the same thing will happen once the needle gets into the middle. The autopilot will follow this track. Don't need to use the autopilot if you don't want to. Of course, you could just be looking at this visually and flying by hand. Okay, what if we're flying in zero visibility? And let's turn on some very aggressive wind. So the good thing with VOR tracking is that it will account for any adjustments you need to make for wind correction. I've turned on a very strong stiff wind from the south, so you can see that the autopilot has changed our heading to be over here to give us a track that follows the ground track that we want, because it will always keep us on this radial. As we approach 22 miles on the DME, you can see that we are arriving at our waypoint there. Now, the next problem will be how to fly this leg. There isn't a radial that we can track, so we're now going to have to fly more manually. So let's go back to a slightly more realistic weather situation. Right, I've turned off that terrible weather. Now we've got to that waypoint, we're going to have to use manual heading 117 while we plan the next stage. So we'll go back to heading mode. And our aircraft is now going to fly along this heading. So now we need to identify when we get to this point here. How would we do that? We can use another radial here. So it says it's between 110 and 111 and 38 miles. So let's set that into our system. So the needle is telling us that, so the gauge is telling us that we're flying from the beacon, which is correct. You must have that the right way round. If it's the wrong way round, your needle will be on the wrong side. So the needle is now displayed on the right. So it says that the radial is to the right of our track, and that is correct here. We are on a slightly converging course, but at the moment we're going to miss that. So I'm going to adjust slightly to turn a little bit right with the intention of sort of joining our radial just before the 38 miles. Okay, we are closing in on it, 33 miles, and the needle is coming across. We don't want to fly through the radial and out the other side, because then we'll be too close to the destination. So, as the needle comes in, I'll make that left turn onto a heading of 110. Oh, actually, so it says that 110 is there and 111 is there. I think I've dialed in 111 there. So that's the point at which we'll intersect. We're going to pretty much intersect at about 37 miles. Needle's in the middle now. This is coming up to 38 miles, so even now in poor visibility, we've not been looking out the window, we know that we are at that point. We can turn due south and carry on to our destination. So now let's take it a step further and use 2 beacons to triangulate our position. So let's assume we've got lost in this fog. I know, we're just in the simulator, so it doesn't matter. I've used slew mode to position myself somewhere over sort of like southwest UK. I don't know exactly where. So let's see if we can figure it out. There's a beacon at Southampton we can use. 113.35. And there's a beacon at Compton we could use. 114.35. Let's tune those 2 radio beacons in the simulator. So this panel is nav 1, that sets this gauge. This panel is nav 2, which sets this one. This one's a simpler version, it's just got 1 needle. This is the one that would display your glide slope, etc. So let's put Southampton in here, 113.35. And let's put Compton in nav 2. Now I've paused the aircraft in flight just so we can take our time doing this. We don't have to be. What I want to know is what is our position relative to those 2 beacons. So I'm just going to turn the dial now. If we wanted to know where we were relative to the beacon, we'd turn this the other way until it says from. So 299-ish. This dial, we want to do the same. At the moment it's saying 2. We want to keep turning this till it says from. And when the needle comes to the middle, so 253, let's call that. If you're in an aircraft that's only got 1 of these dials, you'll just have to keep flicking backwards and forwards between the 2 frequencies, dial them in separately. Okay, so we said that we were on a bearing of 299 from SAM, measure distance from VOR, and we want to move this till we get to 299. And then from Compton we're at 253. So our aircraft should be quite near there. Yeah, there we are. So there we are. Fun with VOR radials. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.